Bruce Campbell, and I'm the director of the Latino Latin American Studies program at College of St. Benedict, St. John's University. Both the College of St. Benedict and St. John's University occupy the original homelands of the Dakota and Anishinaabe peoples. We honor, respect, and acknowledge the indigenous peoples forcibly removed from this territory, whose connection remains today. St. Benedict's Monastery and St. John's Abbey previously operated boarding schools for Native children. Now, students, faculty, and staff are working to repair relationships with our Native Nation neighbors. This evening's event is the first of 3 this semester in our fall series on the theme of race and climate change. Race and racism are features of the history of the Americas and of the present-day social, political, cultural, and economic realities of the region. Race is starkly present in the realities of climate change. In 2020, the international human rights organization Global Witness recorded 227 murders of land and environment defenders around the world, with more than half of these attacks occurring in the Americas. According to the most recent report, quote, the disproportionate number of attacks against indigenous people continued, with over 1/3 of all fatal attacks targeting indigenous people, even though indigenous communities make up only 5% of the world's population. Indigenous peoples were also the target of 5 out of the 7 mass killings recorded in 2020. As the climate crisis intensifies, Global Witness observes, violence against those protecting their land also increases, end quote. One can observe a similar correlation between climate change and mass migration. We are delighted to have with us tonight organizers from COPAL, who will discuss the unique framework the group has developed for drawing connections between the climate crisis and forced migration from Central America to the United States, and for educating and empowering immigrant communities to advocate for policy change that advances justice for people of color most affected by environmental catastrophe. COPAL, Comunidades Organizando el Poder y la Acción Latina, is an organization formed in 2018 that seeks to unite Latinos in Minnesota through community-based democratic practice that builds racial, gender, social, and economic justice. Joining us tonight are Leslie Gutierrez, who is an environmental justice organizer with COPAL. Born in Minneapolis, she grew up in Toronto, Canada, and Puebla, Mexico. She graduated from Bethel University with a degree in environmental studies and minors in psychology and political science. And Eddy Olson-Enamorado, who is an environmental justice intern with COPAL. He was born in the Twin Cities and is the son of a Guatemalan immigrant. He is currently pursuing a degree in biology, society, and the environment at the University of Minnesota. Please join me in a warm welcome of our speakers.
It's my lack of experience with microphones. I usually use megaphones. Hello, everyone. I'm going to stand up just because I don't know. I don't like the formality of the chair. But yeah, thank you for the introduction. My name is Leslie Gutierrez. I use she, they pronouns. I'm the environmental justice organizer at COPAL. As I was introduced, COPAL stands for Comunidades Organizando el Poder y la Acción Latina, which translates to community organizing, Latinx power and action. And this organization was funded out of that, of desiring to build power within the Latinx community. Eddy will bring that more information on that.
Hello?
Yeah, I can do that.
All right. So a little introduction about us at COPAL. As we said, what it stands for, Communities Organizing Latinx Power and Action. So we're a grassroots organization. We're based in Minneapolis. All right. Yeah, and I guess what we do is we help organize for issues that impact our community, because there's a lot of things that affect our community in ways that are unique, and they're more easily addressed when we work with each other and then come to solutions ourselves. And so our mission is to unite and build power in our democracy that includes racial, social, and gender and economic justice, as well as environmental justice, which is what we're here today to talk about. So this is kind of part of our framework, is understanding how, I guess if you aren't aware of what environmental justice is, this is a way to sort of understand it, is where the intersections between environmental issues and social issues kind of come together. And so a big issue is the climate crisis right now. And so as you know, or as you may know, there's climate change is occurring. We're going through a drought here in Minnesota. It was one of the hottest years on record. So the consequences of our greenhouse gas emissions, these consequences are becoming more and more apparent, and they're going to become more apparent as time goes on. And so while these issues affect us here in one way, they often play out in a way that's much worse in Latin America, Central America, and South America. And these problems are often more dire there, not only because the environmental impact is larger, but because they have less resources to deal with it. And so that's a very large problem. So understanding that they're going through drought there as well. There's, hurricanes are becoming more powerful, they're becoming unpredictable. And there's also the issue of large companies that come in often from abroad and have pretty awful relationships with these countries and with the people there. And they don't treat them fairly, they don't treat them with respect, and they don't understand them. And it sets up a really terrible situation for the people that live there. So when these international companies come in, they deal with the resources in a way that creates conflict between people and the authorities there. This conflicts can become violent, they can become really dangerous for families, and that's a big driver of migration. And especially with droughts, things like that, crop failures, people don't have food, they don't have work, they have to go somewhere if they want to live. So the extractive economy is an important piece to understand, especially when we live somewhere where we can kind of sit pretty well, we don't have to worry about a lot of things, but understanding that our consumption here, we could not consume this way without an economy that is highly extractive and destructive and takes advantage of other places in the world. So, kind of going back into forced migration, they have to flee their environments, and they often arrive here with very little resources, often few connections, huge culture shock as well, and they're forced into situations that often are not ideal. They're put into rough communities, rough neighborhoods, and they don't have the resources they need. It's difficult to get jobs, difficult to survive, and they often face environmental issues here because of that status that other people don't have to face. So that's when we start to look at trash incinerators, air pollution, water pollution, access to green spaces. There's huge disparities between what migrant communities face and what people who were born and raised here or wealthier communities face. So we want to kind of change the narrative, get people to understand that there's a lot of different things at play here, international geopolitics, local environmental issues, they're all intertwined. They're inseparable, and the health of people and the health of the community and the health of the environment are intertwined, and they can't be separated. So we also work with other BIPOC organizations and communities to kind of build up that narrative, and because these issues affect us, but they also affect similar communities, and then we're in similar situations. So we try to work together with them to promote these ideas of health and environmental justice.
Yeah, I guess before, thank you, Eddy, for bringing all that information. So that's the framework that we operate behind. We have a big focus, as Eddy mentioned, on climate migration and the effects of the people once they have arrived here, of being continuously exposed to these toxins they were escaping back home. So before I get started, I kind of want to gauge the group. I'm not fully sure what classes y'all are in. So can somebody, how many of you know the difference between environmental justice and environmentalism? By show of hands, you can do that. Yeah. Okay. Does anybody want to, help share environmental justice, a quick definition? Sorry, pop quiz. No? Okay. I can fully. Anybody? Want to go ahead? Sorry to call you out. Yeah. Oh, if you want. Pass the mic.
Okay. Hold on, I need a minute to think.
That's okay.
I kind of agree with what Eddy said. It's the intersection between like climate challenges and social justice. So it really focuses on an intersectional lens between how like BIPOC communities and other marginalized communities are disproportionately affected by climate change.
That's perfect. Yes, thank you. Yes, a clap, please. Yeah, that is exactly it. And the reason why we try to focus, I don't remember, I don't want to misquote whoever said this, and a few of you might have heard this quote already, but it was like something about like environmental work without environmental justice is just gardening, and that is really true. Like, we are at a different stage these days that it's not enough, We have to go ahead and do the extra mile to think about it as a justice work, think about the people who are firstly affected by climate change, and that's who, that's what we want to operate off of. So yeah, as Eddy mentioned, that's exactly it. So how many of you have heard, and again, I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but about the stuff going on in the border right now with Asian communities over there and the immigration situation. Does anybody want to, share a bit about that? If anybody knows? Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I don't know a whole lot, but I was listening to NPR today, and they were talking about how there's like migrants from Haiti who are crossing into the United States from Mexico, but there's not enough resources for them to be in the United States, so they go back to Mexico where they can get food and clothes and that kind of thing, and then try and go back because they just don't have the resources. And so they're just stuck going back and forth, crossing the river, like literally wading through the river every day to get what they need, and they're just like not getting the support in either place.
Yeah, thank you. Definitely. So that's something that I want to relate to what we're currently seeing, right? Like, this is happening now. A lot of these migrants, so it's 12,000 migrants, I believe, just kind of being in limbo in the middle of the border, kind of going back and forth, trying to get food from one side and crossing to the other. And it's definitely a lot of issues, like social justice issues that come with that. But we need to start asking the reasons, like, why is this happening to our communities? Why is it happening to the Caribbean, to the Latin America, to the south of the world? And why are we seeing these effects kind of continue on after decades? This isn't just, 3 years. This isn't 5-10 years back. This is history. This is what we've been seeing. So why are we expecting, outcomes to be different if the system hasn't changed? And that's what we want to build, that power and understanding of there's connection between these communities, not only like Latinx folks in Latin America, but all of the migrant communities in the world. So a bit of that, and it relates back to the climate crisis in Central America, where there's like droughts happening, there's hurricanes, like earthquakes, a lot of these different climate effects forcing like communities to migrate as is happening right now with Haiti because of the earthquake and different political situations happening. These communities are being forced out. So where are they going to go? And this is going to only get worse. And we've been seeing it with Honduras, and that's the example that I have here, where we have mining companies creating these holes. You see, this is not natural. This is something that was usually, like before this, was populated by farmers, that was populated by indigenous communities, but then companies are coming in and creating this, And where are these people going? And then we call it, a crisis, the migrant crisis, but it's much more than that, It's a systematic racism, if I dare to say. So we can continue on. Yeah, so as I mentioned, The Canadian company is called Greenstone. It started drilling in this zone in 1997 and is still pushing people out to this day. So this is 400 acres. Were given to this company from the Honduran government, and it included 3 communities and 2 cemeteries that were in this place. Because of that, there was a cyanide discharge, and in 2003, that mining company contaminated the River Lara, and about 18,000 fish were killed there, and that's where a lot of the communities there were feeding off of. And obviously, the waterways were contaminated as well. And there was a lot of aquatic life that was changed, an ecosystem as well, because of that discharge. And that has created a big conflict. So it's not just about, the environmental impact, the health impacts that come with it, but also policing. And it can tie back to that, right? To the conflict that was created after this. So all of these images are images that were taken from one of our delegation trips that we took back in 2018. A few of us, or I didn't go, unfortunately, but there were a few folks who went to a few countries in South America and visited these sites. And this is one of the pictures taken by them where they're literally displacing some of these folks. I don't know if you can, is there a pointer on this? I feel like, oh, there we go. Yeah, so this is like little huts where people were living, and they're being obviously taken out by the police here. And it's not about the scarcity of the resources, it's just about how it's distributed and who it's given to. So Eddy was mentioning the extractive economy behind all of this, and it creates traumas within the communities, right? It's like, for one, you have the effects on health. You have the effects on education as well for the children here. You have effects on the quality of the environment as well in those areas. And then on top of that, you put the policing side of things and pushing people out and forcing them to migrate, not only internationally, but even locally. Migrating outside of a country in itself is a privilege. Having the funds to be able to go to a different country, to migrate, even if it is without documents, that is a privilege, because not a lot of people have the money to actually do that. So migration is also nationally, you have to, and you're being forced to do that too. You could see that these people didn't choose to do that. So as I mentioned, 2 cemeteries were there before, and those 400 acres that were given to that Canadian company. They were taken out from their graves in these spaces, and oftentimes without the consent of their families. So then on top of that, that's another added thing. And so you can see those images here of them taking some bodies out. So I know that this is really heavy sometimes for folks, but it's the reality that we're living in. This isn't something that you'd see happening, in the suburbs here in the US. When would you see something like that? But it's caused by countries like the US. So, and then on top of that, we have the forced, once that's done, we have the forced migration. Farmers are internally displaced and forced to migrate to urban centers and then outside of the country as well. Families flee abroad only after exhausting their social and family networks. So there's a whole process to migrating internationally or even nationally. And I wanted to touch back on a little bit of connecting back the fights with what we do here in the United States. Why does this matter in Minnesota? We have, for example, how many of you know about Line 3? With the raise of hands. Okay, I'm happy to see that it's a good majority of you. So Line 3 is a tar sands oil pipeline that's being built and almost finished up north. And it is crossing through treaty territory and is passing multiple waterways and is going to spill because all oil pipelines spill. And it is owned by Enbridge, which is a Canadian company. And not to say, it's not the Canadian, this is an example of what countries with power can do over people who have been historically marginalized. So as we have Line 3 passing through treaty land, through indigenous land, through wildlife as well, we have that in Latin America as well. So with the mining company, you can connect it back. This isn't just local, it's everywhere, and we wanted to bring that around. So that's why it matters. There's, and then here, we'll be talking about that in a bit, but that's the Herc incinerator. That's the Herc incinerator in North Minneapolis. If any of you are familiar with it, it is an incinerator that takes, I think there was a recent study where only 11.3, I want to say, % of the plastic in Minneapolis is actually recycled, and the rest is burned in this facility. And it is located in a predominantly Black, Indigenous community of color, and the emissions are really severe. I believe it was like 56 point something % of the asthma rates in that community were caused by this incinerator alone. And this incinerator also receives not only plastics from the city of Minneapolis, but also from the suburbs. So you can see, why is it located here? These are the questions that we need to start asking ourselves. For one, like Line 3, why was it placed there? Why was that mining company attacking this community of predominantly indigenous folks, predominantly like farm workers, people in that area? Why wouldn't it be placed in the suburbs? Why wouldn't it be placed right beside, the rich neighborhoods? It's strategic, and it's also city planning. If any of you are going into that sort of work, please keep that in mind. Communities in those areas, it's needed. But you can go into that. And yeah, so Central America's in Minnesota. We were seeing an increase of Central American immigrants in the Twin Cities and southern Minnesota. For example, like Worthington is kind of bringing in there's a lot of migrants coming in. So 13,000 in southern Minnesota have received more no acompañados. I'll say it inside. You can learn a new word. Minors per capita than almost anywhere in the country. And then, so when we see those populations coming into these different farming communities, they're also being exploited in these areas through the facilities are there. I think it's Wilmer, I want to say. I can't remember where. There's like the factory farm, the meat processing, like meat packaging plant, if any of you are familiar. What is it called?
Genio turkey.
Yeah, can you say that louder? Here you go.
Genio turkey.
Genio turkey, there you go. Yeah, so it's a lot of undocumented folks that are being exploited because they are being kind of forced to work in these conditions because, when you're not protected by a piece of paper, you can get your human rights taken away from you, apparently. So, so that's, something that we try to catch. And sorry, I'm being so sad and negative right now, but I promise you there's something better coming. And there's work being done by not only COPAL, but other organizations all across Minnesota and really, all across the U.S. that are doing great, great work. So again, this is the Herc incinerator. So it stands for Hennepin Energy Recovery Center. It has been deemed as green energy, which is false. Don't believe that. It is not green energy. It is not renewable energy. It is plastic. That is, and then something that we have to, think about when we turn on the light. Like, honestly, it's not about our actions, of course. It's not individual action. It's about system change. But it is important to know where your energy is coming from and understand these systems as well. And I'm sure you're all here learning about that for a reason, right? Talked about this, and then I'll translate this. Entre los individuos como entre las naciones, el respeto al derecho ajeno es la paz, which translates to between individuals, like between nations, the respect the respect to each other is the peace. And that is a big message, you know, of like, how do we respect each other, not only each other here, but the way we think about the world as well, the way that we operate internationally. And yeah, it's Benito Juarez. So we're trying to change that narrative. We want to create a Minnesota that includes immigrants and frontline communities in the push and establishment of green regenerative economy, because we benefit from it. Every one of you, and myself included, everyone living in Minnesota benefits off of these systems in some sort of way. So how do we address this issue that we are here and have the power to do it? And a bit of that way we are doing that is by right now we're coordinating with many legislators of the Posse Caucus to address the way the state can push for protecting our environment and frontline communities. So this past weekend, I don't know if any of you are familiar with it, but there was some actions being done in DC to advocate for a pathway to citizenship for migrants with DACA, TPS, agricultural workers, and essential workers. And that will, like, honestly allow a lot of change for communities, because once they've arrived here in the U.S., they're all, like, a lot of these communities are living in limbo, right? After they've been here for 20 plus years, we hear stories all the time of people being displaced from their home back to a country they haven't lived in for 20 years while they've been contributing to the economy here. So, you know, that's something that we're trying to address and advocating for and fighting. So show up to the protests, show up to the spaces, be active and educate yourself. And yeah, go ahead.
So this is a piece of legislation that we're working on to try to get passed to solve some of the issues. You know, I guess you could say any legislation is a Band-Aid when the change that needs to happen is so deep-rooted and systemic. But nevertheless, this is something that we believe could help with certain issues that we see in terms of things that get built and developments in the state. So it's called the Frontline Communities Protection Act. Or the Cumulative Impacts Bill is another way that it's referred to. And so this bill would add something where when things are being proposed to be built, they have to receive permits, they have to receive pollution permits from the Pollution Control Agency, permits from other agencies in order to be able to build these facilities, whether it's a HERC incinerator or maybe some other high-rise or whatever development is going on. And so this would make it so that when these permits are issued, you would have to take into account the cumulative impacts. And so kind of what that means is issues like cumulative air pollution from the environment, or the health issues. You have Superfund sites where there's pollution in the soil, or maybe the lead pipes are worse in some areas. And so you have these different aspects from the environment that they accumulate, and they make the health situation much worse for low-income communities and communities of color. And so this would make it so that these things have to be taken into account when these permits are issued. And so it's an important step towards environmental justice in our eyes, to recognize that these things are they're disproportionately affecting our community in a way that, is making the situation worse. And so this would, you're looking at where infrastructure is built, taking these things into account is important to ensure that these things are being built in an equitable way, and that we look at disparities between the communities and kind of take into account the environmental justice lens in that.
That was our last one, yeah. Well, so I hope that was helpful in connecting the different fights that we kind of operate off of acting locally but thinking internationally, and how the effects of the changes we do here, of the work that each one of you is going to end up doing. And no matter what field you're in, understanding these systems is crucial. It is necessary, and it is a responsibility that each of you have as college-educated people, as people who are going into these fields and giving a voice to a lot of people who have historically not been given one. So, I hope that this encourages you to, this wasn't enough information. I understand that because we don't have that much time, but I hope that it sparks a little bit of emotional desire to look for that information, to understand each of your careers and how it will contribute to different situations, either negatively or positively. Because we don't really have that much time to waste, and it's important work, and I'm really proud of you all for being in this space, taking some time, and I thank you for the opportunity of speaking to y'all. So now I think we're gonna open up for questions if anybody has any. Or comments, or thoughts, observations.
What has been like the biggest driver, or like the biggest thing that gets you through just organizing and your activism as you go about your journey, I guess?
Yeah. So the question was, what was your biggest driver in continuing the work as an organizer? And firstly, I think I actually recently started identifying myself as an organizer. I was like, I'm just a community member who has stakes in this. So I think even if it's not paid organizing, even if it's like just in your own circles, within your own family, that's organizing and that's powerful. But I guess something that sometimes can be discouraging as you see like all of the sad information, but I think there's a lot of positive in that there are a lot of people doing this work and seeing the value in doing it, so it's not lost. There's a lot of hope, and there's a lot of mentorship, and there's a lot of people who've come before us that have put the level on the floor of space so that we can stand here today, and we wouldn't be here without them. So how do we contribute to building that next step for the next generation? So what keeps me going is really just my stakes in this, right? Like, I'm a human, and I will be affected by climate change simply for living. And I am currently here, and I want to make sure that that doesn't happen, and for the people I love as well. So I guess it's really that. It's the anger, I think. Find that fire, find that anger, and use it. Because if you push it out, it's also, not positive. Use it.
Yeah, go ahead.
You talked about your biggest, your driver. What's then the biggest roadblock you see you come into contact with, most frequently?
Oh, yeah. Oof. Let me start. Not yelling and being angry. I think it definitely is very, the system. It feels very hopeless sometimes. And I'm sure a lot of you have experienced that, of, hitting a spot in the road where you're like, how am I gonna convince that person that climate change is real? When they are telling me they're sitting in a position, so when we presented this bill this past session, one of the people who was voting against it was saying that environmental racism was fake, that environmental racism wasn't real, and that it was made up by organizations and institutions, and and that is the hardest thing, honestly, when you see people who have been so close-minded in a certain way or have operated off of greed and money mentality, that they forget about human rights and they forget about the effects it has on the rest of the world. That's what hurts. And when they're sitting in a position of power, but that's why we take them out. That's why we vote. That's why we run for office. I hope that y'all do, and kind of exercise that. And we really need to educate ourselves, I think, too.
Yeah, I would say, a lot of the times I think the people in charge want you to kind of get lost in the bureaucracy. They want to make it so it just isn't worth dealing with. They try to make it difficult to understand, or make you think that there's just no chance for you to do anything about it. But once you study up and you read and you pay attention to what's going on, you can kind of catch up and see what kind of game they're playing. And a lot of people try to pass the buck, like when you ask them, try to hold them accountable for things, and understanding that sometimes they're not being honest. Sometimes they could do something about it, and so trying to understand, I guess the games people play, and putting pressure on people, I think is a good way to kind of go about dealing with that.
I guess I can add to that too. I think, like understanding who has the power and then figuring out how do you gain power as well within your community, within your spaces to advocate for what matters for you. I don't know, if I ask right now, who are your senators? Sit down with them. You can talk to them. You really can. I mean, they're really accessible. You could email their office and get a meeting with them and tell them, this is what I want. This is what my community wants. You work for me because that's really what it is. And this is what we need. And sit down with them, and learn who your senators are, learn who your representatives are. Elections are coming as well this coming November, and, learning about that, yep. Do we have any other questions? Yeah, go ahead, sorry, you're next.
What would be like a challenge that you face every day when you are present with someone who doesn't really understand and really gets affected by this environmental racism? What is one good way that you can share that same knowledge with someone who is really affected by that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So how do you have a conversation with people who don't fully understand what environmental racism are because they don't experience it? Is that okay? Yeah, that is a difficult one. I went to Bethel University. Bethel University is not a very diverse university, and I've definitely had a lot of conversations because, I grew up in Puebla. I saw that firsthand. I saw in Mexico, the effects of these things. Firstly, and I mean, I'm sure a lot of you, I don't know where all of you are coming from, but, maybe you lived in California and you saw the wildfires. Maybe you lived in New Orleans and you saw the floods. Maybe you lived in New York and you also saw the floods and you also saw all of the stuff going on. This is happening here too, So that's how do we connect it back to stuff happening immediately here? Because I think oftentimes with environmental racism, people kind of think about it as an outside thing, but it's happening here in our communities right now. And I think a way to have those conversations is really and I'm still learning on how to do this. I am going to confess that because it is difficult and it isn't emotional. And I want to advise you to also protect your heart because sometimes when you have these conversations, the person who's left with the trauma is you. The person who is left with the anger is you, and the other person can just walk away and not have to deal with it, but you are the one experiencing it. So, that's the first thing, and know your boundaries. But second, also, there is a responsibility that we have with educating one another, and obviously with boundaries. But I think really what it is learning the information, showing the data. It's there. Presenting that, saying this is what it is, and this is if you choose to believe it, There's only so much you can do for the education of others. But I think having that conversation initially is the first step. I don't know. Might have more to add to that?
Yeah, well, I guess I would echo the kind of guarding your own energy, seeing where you, how you spend, because sometimes people, they aren't there to listen, they're there to get their point across. They don't want to hear what you have to say, and they just, they want to argue, but they don't want to understand. And so kind of being wary of that, I suppose. But I think we do kind of also have that responsibility to try to educate and try to build a better understanding for everybody. And so I suppose, coming with the data because the data is there. And having, your own story, I suppose people respond well to stories a lot of the times. And so if you can find it in yourself to, I guess either share your own or share somebody else's that it's very obvious, people kind of understand that better often. because yeah, people have intense stories sometimes, and that's what kind of gets people to understand things a little bit better is when they can kind of relate to it and see the progression of events and understand the full picture, I think. Yeah.
Okay, I have a pretty similar question, but I was wondering what else can we do to like convince people outside of our community of the effects of like climate crises and social crisis? Because I know both crises happen internationally, nationally, like you said. But besides like making people like aware, what else can we do? We have the bills, you know, and we might have similar bills in other countries, but what else, you know, can we do?
That is a really good question. Yeah, I mean, you know, I'll mention a few of the things that you just said. I think, yes, one, bringing the education to our communities. Oftentimes, that is, they don't have access to the same information we have in a classroom, we have with each other, we have through social media, so showing that information, of course, but also, you know, seeing what pieces of legislation there is and getting involved in that way. I mean, there's so many organizations, communities, people that have already done this work, and how do we contribute to it? I think that's a big step of like reaching out to your local organization. I know you're here, you know, this university is a little bit further away from the city, so it's not as accessible, but there is remote work that you can do because it's always needed in activism. I mean, even here, I'm sure there's a bunch of things around here that can intentionally like keep an eye out for, or kind of organize, you know, your own circles, your own spaces. I mean, there's clubs here. I don't know what the clubs are, but bringing in speakers from organizations to continue promoting that. Maybe that could be something to share that information and kind of be inspired by organizers already doing the work. Have anything to add?
Yeah, I would say kind of to add on to that, like consider or think about like what communities you could be bringing it to, and I'd say don't be afraid to bring it into new places that maybe haven't been thought of, coming up with new solutions. Taking a really interdisciplinary approach to it. Because one thing I've come to see, I think through my major and just in life in general, is that there's often big gaps between people maybe in their major, they're kind of in their little bubble, what they're studying, and they maybe, I would say, sometimes the biologists don't have a good understanding of the economics or the politics of it, and maybe the people in politics don't have a good understanding of the environmental issues or the biology aspects. And so not being afraid to kind of make connections where you don't, or where they haven't been made before. I think something that felt kind of profound to me that I hadn't considered, I have a friend who's studying product design, and he said that something that they talk about is they strongly encourage students, don't design for military corporations. You know, these things, you're not separated from the outside effects of wherever you go, whatever industry you work in. It's all intertwined. And so making sure you have that good ethic, an environmental justice ethic, just a well-rounded ethic in general into whatever industry you go into. It can be anything. And exploring where you can take that and how these things can be incorporated and how you can help come up with new solutions, whether it's organizing that little community that you have at your workplace, or pushing them to adapt new solutions within that, sustainability solutions or things like that. You can take it anywhere and apply it anywhere. And I would strongly urge you to look for new places where you can apply these things. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
So as other other activists, you always face either a win or a lose. When you lose a policy, let's say you try for a policy, right? You lose that fight to pass it on. What motivates you to keep going and continue the fight for what you want to accomplish?
Oh, I love that question. Yes. So what keeps you going even after the losses, even after, your bill isn't being, yeah, that's a big one actually, because that's kind of what we're dealing with right now. I mean, with our Frontline Community Protections Act or Cumulative Impacts Bill, I think setting it forth first, like, so we brought it into session this past session, and it wasn't passed. It was in an omnibus with a bunch of other environmental bills, and then they ended up like saying nothing with the word environmental justice, nothing with the word environmental racism, nothing with the words climate change are going to be passed, and then that obviously, you know, took down our bill because it was 90% of the words in the bill. But I think we presented it with the understanding that it wasn't going to pass, but that's not the point right now. What we're doing with the bills every session is building community power, building community conversations and understanding of why this is important. I currently live in North Minneapolis, right beside the Herc incinerator, just a few blocks away, and I talk to my neighbors and I'm like, okay, do y'all know about this facility? Y'all been living here 20 years and you don't know about the Herc incinerator right there? A lot of people don't know about it, right? And there's currently a campaign to shut down the Herc incinerator, and it's been going on for years, and maybe the loss is that every time we try to push it out, there's a loss, and there's like, you know, the money, and where is the trash gonna go, and like all of these other bigger conversations that try to push it away. So it feels like a loss. But we started realizing, like, wait, how many people, how many houses have we knocked on? How many people now know that this facility is there that didn't know it was there before? How many people are being active in this? We're bringing so many communities into understanding what this is and are now joining us. When we started with 4 people, now we have 20, now we have 50, now we have, you know, that's how you start building it. And when enough people make noise, they can't shut us down, you know? It's only time until they realize, like, there's only so much power we have over the power of the people. Yeah, so that's big. Thank you for asking that one. Yeah, it's what is it like after the loss is like?
Yeah, that's right. Okay. Yeah, I think for me, it's looking around at the community and seeing that the needs are still there and that people still want change. And maybe this one avenue has been closed, but keeping an open mind, an open heart, and trying again, and trying something else, and looking at different ways to do it. I suppose just a general, I think other people inspire me. And I think maybe some people want to push a hopelessness agenda, and I'm strongly against that. I don't buy it. I don't think it's worth putting energy into that. I think just getting in the mentality of what can I do, not about what can't I do, is just a good way to keep going. Because I think this earth has a lot of life left to give, and I think we shall be ready to fight for it.
I have a question. This is kind of thinking of both of you as a recent college graduate and a soon-to-be college graduate, and sort of like, well. So I'm going to kind of frame this question around one of you as a recent college graduate and the other one as a soon-to-be college graduate, and thinking about here this St. Ben, St. John's context where there's a pretty strong kind of inclination towards some form of global study, whether that be taking the shape of study abroad programs that lots of students are interested in. There's also fairly large international student population on campus. And so this kind of like international dimension to our campuses is fabulous. And I think sometimes though, the experience tends to be one where people will think of going away and having this really incredible experience, but not always finding how to sort of like be grounded back at home and bring that experience back in some kind of meaningful ways. And for the two of you, whether it was in formal study or just your own personal biographies, there's a kind of like global dimension to your lives, just hearing you talk a little bit. And I'm wondering if you can say a little bit about, if you can name sort of like what was it that allowed you to bring that like global vision or perspective back to be so focused on the kinds of stuff that's happening right here in the communities where you live. I don't know if that's too big of a question, but.
Do you answer? Yeah. Okay. Oh man. Yeah, that is a big one. So as they introduced me in my bio, I grew up in a few different countries, and I've done some work in all three, and I think I've always been, I started off with neuroscience, if any of you are studying that. Started off with neuroscience in college. I did that for 2 years, and then I spoke to one of my college advisors, and she was like, what do you know yourself to be since you were a little girl? Like, what was it, the thing that you've always liked? And it just immediately was like environmental stuff, right? It was always me saying like, shut down that faucet, don't pollute. I was that girl saying litter bug at all the kids in the playground. And I think with that perspective, I kind of connected it back to my community. What does it mean to actually do this work with the people I love here? And I've been living in North Minneapolis, right, for now. I just recently moved there, but something that kind of like drives me in that is seeing and knowing the effects that it has on that community, and seeing like I have the power to do something about this. Why am I not doing it? So I think that perspective of what my community is and the love I have for it has motivated me to push and change things. So I think like I want to encourage all of you to figure out what that is. For me, it's been environmental work, but you're all studying something different, and what is that thing there that that connects it back to your history, to your life, to your community? Like, I have a responsibility with my parents living back in Mexico, right, of the work that I do right here in Minnesota is gonna, I believe, collaterally affect them in Mexico. We were in DC, in Washington, DC this past weekend, fighting for immigrant rights, fighting for pathway to citizenship for folks, and that makes me think like there's also, and that relates back to environment because of, as we spoke about already, climate migrants. A lot of people with TPS or temporary protected status have received that because of climate change, because of the disasters happening in their country. So likewise, it's like, how do I see what is happening in my hometown, what is happening in Mexico in general, and fighting for it here, that I have the power to do that here in the United States, with the power that this place has and the resources I have here and the education I have here. How do I use that tool to say, Mom and Dad, I'm helping you there too? I've lived away from them for like 7 years now, and since I was 16, and I always think like, I should go back, but no, I start reminding myself like the work that I am doing here is gonna help them there. And that's just my story, right? That's not gonna be the same story that y'all have, but why are you in college, What is it that, outside of, obviously, society telling you have to go to school, but what is it that keeps you here, right? There's something you want to learn. There's positive in that. So how do you use that desire to learn for something that'll be bigger?
Yeah, I suppose, I feel a lot of the same way that Leslie said. I think I feel similar things in that, I don't know, you feel a responsibility towards your family, the community you came from. And so, I think it's good and great that, especially young college students, we want to go out into the world and learn and get as much as we can, become, good, well-rounded citizens of this planet and gain all this knowledge. But yeah, having, I think, that mentality of like, how can I bring this back home too, as well? How can I, I guess pay back or pay something back to the community that raised me, that made me who I am, and I guess not leaving them behind I think feeling that responsibility towards family or community is a powerful one, and I think often within your own community, maybe I think that there's a good way to think about it is that the place you grew up is often the place you know most about, and sometimes that's where you can make the most change. If you really, really know your community, you can be pretty powerful in changing that. But also going other places is good. I think it's good as college students that you go somewhere to learn new things and to bring back new knowledge. so you can help lift up your community as well.
I'm not sure if that answered your question. Thank you.
I warned you that I was going to ask you this question. So at dinner before the event, I explained that we've got a group of students in the audience who are undertaking the semester to design and eventually paint a community-engaged mural for the new multicultural center. And we're going to be moving the next few weeks into the process of sort of imagining ways of engaging the community around public conversations centered on the value of inclusion. I'm wondering if you have any advice as activists, as current and recent college students who have been activists on college campuses as well for this group of muralists.
Yeah, I think the first step as artists who are doing that type of work, mural work, identify yourself as an organizer because that's what it is. Organizing can look different, and it, art is one of them. And an advice that I have for all organizers is to talk to community. You are no one as an organizer if you are not consulting with your community, because you as an individual can't speak for everyone. So what does that mean for y'all that are building a mural? It's talking to the activists in the community. It's talking to the people doing the work in the organizations, and talking to the community that lives there. What do you want to see? Or finding the stories. As I was, letting you know over dinner, there's a group that reached out to me a few months ago, actually, to interview me about the work that we've been doing at COPAL, and to be able to be inspired to paint a mural. And it was literally that. She reached out and she was like asking all of these fundamental questions that made me think, really profoundly about the work that I do. And I realized that not only was that person getting, inspiration for her art, but also I was getting inspired for mine. And that's the power that art has, right? And use that not only when the product is done, but the process of building that mural. That in itself is inspiring, because you can include community members into that as well and remind them, why are you doing the work that you're doing? One of the questions that she was asking me was literally like, when you think about the issues in the world and they're so exhausting, and you are doing this work 24/7 because it's the work that you love, what grounds you? And it was a reminder to me to think, what does ground me? What has been the reason why I'm still doing this, even though, I just got back from DC at 10 p.m. last night, and I got up again to the office at 8 a.m., and it was why am I doing this? It's because I love it, right? And it was a reminder of people who did that art of what is grounding you? What is the reason why you're doing this? It's for my community. It's for the people I love, and because I want to see a better world. And as artists that are going to be doing that, ask those questions, remind them, help them remember as well, because you can be very burnt out after doing this work for a while. You get exhausted, and we don't need that, and there's no time for that, for exhaustion sometimes, but definitely for rest, though, for rest.
Yeah, I would I strongly echo it, because talking to people in the community, engaging them, and don't be afraid to build a longer lasting relationship with them too, not just talking to them and leaving, but be their friend, try to have it a two-way street of communication. So yeah, that's what I would say.
If there are no other questions, I think we could wrap things up. For helping us have I think, pretty wonderful conversation here tonight. Thank you all for coming. The muralists, please come here and talk to me before you leave. And we'll have a brief chat.
Yeah, and I just want to say really quickly, I'm here, but I live in Minneapolis, but y'all are all welcome to reach out for any type of work that you're interested in getting involved in, any information on, you know, I do environmental work, but, you know, I also like other things, and I'm active in like immigration stuff and also education stuff, and you know, I want to make sure, because somebody who came to speak at my university offered that, and I reached out, and then I got a job, you know? So it's like, if you're interested in this sort of work, definitely reach out, definitely let me know, and you can get involved. We have different committees, as Eddy was saying.
I think I forgot to say, but yeah, it was immigration, health and wellness, education, environmental justice, and
environmental justice,
the Workers Center as well.
Oh yeah,
Worker
we have a
issues.
worker center that just opened. We're working on workers' rights as well. So for anybody doing agriculture work, workers anywhere, that's a resource as well. So that's just the side thing I wanted to add.